Forget knights in shining armor and romantic banquets. Imagine waking up every morning surrounded by freezing stone, choking smoke, and endless noise, because this was real life inside a medieval castle. Forget fairy tales. Medieval castles were harsh, exhausting places to live. They were never meant to be comfortable, peaceful, or beautiful. A castle was built for survival, and everyone inside had to adapt to conditions that would feel unbearable by modern standards. The moment you stepped inside, the cold was impossible to ignore. Thick stone walls absorbed moisture from the air and stayed damp year-round. Even during warmer months, the interior felt chilly and heavy. In winter, the cold became relentless. Stone floors drained heat from the body, and walls radiated an icy presence that no amount of clothing could fully block. Smoke was everywhere. Fires burned constantly in open hearths, but chimneys were inefficient and ventilation was poor. Smoke collected under the ceiling, stinging the eyes and making breathing difficult. Over time, it blackened beams, walls, and tapestries. The smell of ash mixed with sweat, animals, old food, and waste, creating an atmosphere that was far from pleasant. Noise filled the castle at all hours. Footsteps echoed through long corridors, armor clanked, tools struck stone and metal, doors slammed, and voices carried far through the open spaces. Horses neighed in nearby stables, dogs barked, and servants shouted instructions. Privacy was almost non-existent, and silence was rare, even at night. Keeping warm was a constant battle. Castles were massive structures with high ceilings and wide halls, nearly impossible to heat effectively. Central hearths offered some warmth, but only to those standing close. Later fireplaces improved the situation slightly, but most rooms remained cold. Drafts slipped through cracks in stonework, narrow windows, and poorly sealed doors. During winter, people slept fully clothed. Wool garments, cloaks, fur blankets, and layered bedding were essential. Even so, nights were bitter. Fires had to be maintained because once they went out, relighting them took time and effort. Sometimes even nobles rose from their beds to tend the flames themselves. Servants were not always nearby, and warmth could not be taken for granted. Castles were not built out of ambition or romance. They were born from fear. After the collapse of the Roman Empire, Europe fractured into countless small territories. Roads fell into disrepair, trade declined, and central authority weakened. Kings ruled in name, but real power rested with local feudal lords. These lords faced constant threats. Rival nobles fought over land, raiders attacked settlements, and borders shifted frequently. Without strong defenses, survival was uncertain. A castle provided safety, control, and visibility over the surrounding lands. From its towers, enemies could be spotted early. Behind its walls, people could endure sieges and attacks. Every aspect of castle design reflected this reality. Walls were thick, windows were narrow, and entrances were limited and heavily guarded. Comfort was always secondary to defense. What kept attackers out also trapped cold, smoke, and noise inside. For those who lived there, this harsh environment was normal. Children were born into it, grew up within stone walls, and learned early that comfort was rare and security was everything. A medieval castle was not a dream or a symbol of luxury. It was a tool for survival, and for those inside, it was simply home. Castles were never built for comfort. They were built to endure war, fear, and constant threat. Medieval castles existed for one primary reason: survival. They were not symbols of luxury or status in the way we imagine today. Instead, they were practical strongholds designed to protect people, supplies, and power in an unstable and dangerous world. Local lords needed secure places to live and rule from. A castle protected not only the lord's family, but also armed followers, servants, food stores, weapons, and valuable goods. In times of danger, it became a refuge for people from nearby villages who fled behind the walls when enemies approached. A castle was also a tool of control. From its towers, the surrounding land could be watched and dominated. Roads, rivers, and trade routes were monitored, and anyone passing nearby knew exactly who held power in the region. The presence of a castle alone was often enough to discourage rebellion or attack. The earliest castles, built in the 9th and 10th centuries, were simple and crude. Most were made of wood, not stone. A typical design included a wooden tower placed on a raised mound of earth, surrounded by a ditch and a wooden fence. These early fortifications were quick to build and easy to repair, which mattered more than appearance. Comfort was almost non-existent. Living space was tight, dark, and exposed to the elements. The goal was not to live well, but to survive an attack. Many towers had entrances located several meters above ground level. Ladders or wooden stairs could be pulled up in case of danger, cutting off access entirely. If attackers arrived, defenders could retreat inside, remove the ladder, and wait. Food supplies were limited, but most raids were short. Endurance mattered more than elegance. A small, defensible structure could be more effective than a large, vulnerable one. As time passed, wealth slowly increased and construction methods improved. Wood, which burned easily and decayed over time, began to be replaced with stone. Stone keeps were stronger, more durable, and far more intimidating. By the 11th century, stone castles became common across much of Europe. These new castles were often built on hills or rocky outcrops. Height provided visibility and made direct assaults more difficult. Thick stone walls absorbed impact from weapons, while narrow windows limited entry points. Towers allowed defenders to fire downward at attackers, giving them a significant advantage. Inside, the layout remained focused on defense. Space was divided by function, not comfort. Storage rooms, armories, and guard areas took priority. Living quarters were secondary and often cramped. Everything within the walls served the larger purpose of protection. A medieval castle was not meant to welcome guests. It was meant to withstand danger. Every beam, wall, and doorway reflected the constant expectation of conflict. Life inside followed the same principle: stay alert, stay prepared, and endure whatever came next. Life within castle walls was crowded, chaotic, and constantly loud. A medieval castle was not a quiet residence for a single family. It was a living organism filled with people, animals, and nonstop activity. From dawn until late at night, noise echoed through stone corridors and open halls. Horses stamped and snorted in stables, often located inside the outer walls for protection. Blacksmiths hammered iron, repairing weapons, armor, and tools. Soldiers trained in courtyards, shouting commands and clashing metal. Servants moved constantly, carrying food, water, firewood, and supplies. Dogs barked, messengers arrived, and bells rang to signal meals, meetings, or danger. Stone amplified every sound. Footsteps echoed endlessly, voices traveled far, and even small noises felt louder than they should. Privacy barely existed. Most rooms were shared, separated only by wooden partitions or curtains. Only the highest-ranking residents could hope for some personal space, and even that came much later in castle history. The main hall was the heart of daily life. It served as dining room, meeting place, courtroom, and sleeping area for many residents. At night, servants and soldiers often slept on benches or the floor near the hearth. During the day, the same space filled with movement, conversation, and work. Children grew up surrounded by this constant noise and activity. Noble childhoods were nothing like modern ones. From an early age, boys were prepared for military life. They learned to ride horses, handle weapons, and follow discipline. By their early teens, many became squires, serving knights and training for future combat. Girls were raised with different but equally serious expectations. They were taught how to manage households, oversee servants, track food supplies, and organize daily routines. In the absence of the lord, women often ran the castle entirely. Responsibility came early, and mistakes could have real consequences. Education focused on practical skills rather than comfort or leisure. Life inside a castle demanded awareness, obedience, and endurance. There was little room for idleness. Everyone had a role, and failure to perform it could threaten the safety of the entire household. Even rest was limited. With so many people living together, sleep was often interrupted by noise, cold, or duty. Guards changed shifts through the night. Fires needed attention, and unexpected sounds could signal danger. Every unfamiliar noise carried meaning, and alertness became second nature. A medieval castle was never peaceful. It was loud, crowded, and demanding. But for those who lived inside its walls, this constant activity meant security. Noise meant life. Movement meant readiness. And silence, when it did appear, was often the most unsettling thing of all. In a medieval castle, survival depended on the season, and winter was always the greatest enemy. Life inside a castle changed dramatically with the time of year. Everything, food, warmth, workload, and safety followed the rhythm of the seasons. Summer offered activity and movement, while winter brought isolation, scarcity, and constant struggle. Women's quarters were usually placed away from the noisiest and most crowded areas of the castle. These rooms were designed to be warmer and more protected from drafts. Walls were covered with tapestries that served more than a decorative purpose. Thick fabric helped trap heat, block wind, and soften the harsh stone interior. These spaces were often brighter and more colorful than the rest of the castle. Embroidery, wooden furniture, and personal items added some sense of comfort in an otherwise severe environment. From here, women managed much of the castle's daily life. They supervised servants, organized food storage, planned meals, and ensured that supplies lasted through the colder months. Food was a constant concern. What people ate depended heavily on the season. During warmer months, fresh meat came from hunts, and vegetables could be grown nearby. But winter changed everything. Fresh food disappeared, and survival depended on preparation. Meat was salted or smoked. Fish was dried. Greens, beans, and legumes became essential. Bread was eaten daily and formed the foundation of most meals. Water was often unsafe to drink, so ale or weak beer was consumed instead. Alcohol was low in strength but safer than untreated water. Spices were rare and expensive, imported from distant regions. When available, they were used generously. Not only did they improve flavor, but they also helped mask the taste of preserved food that had been stored for months. Warmth was never guaranteed. Fires burned constantly, but fuel had to be carefully managed. Wood was precious, and wasting it could mean freezing later. Rooms closest to the hearth were the warmest, while upper floors and corners of the castle remained bitterly cold. As night fell, the castle transformed. Doors were barred, gates secured, and guards took their positions. Torches and candles provided minimal light, casting long shadows across stone walls. Darkness filled corridors, and every sound seemed louder than before. Sleep came lightly. The cold, the noise, and the awareness of danger never fully faded. Yet this nightly routine was normal. The castle did not rest. It endured. Every season tested those inside its walls, and survival depended on preparation, discipline, and resilience. For centuries, castles represented power, security, and control. Their thick walls and towering gates made them seem unbreakable. But over time, the world around them began to change, and castles slowly lost their purpose. As generations passed, life inside castles became slightly more bearable. Dirt floors were replaced with wooden planks. Furniture improved, becoming sturdier and more functional. Glass windows, once a rare luxury, began to appear in important rooms, reducing drafts and allowing light inside without sacrificing safety. Candles and chandeliers replaced simple torches. Cushions, rugs, and tapestries added warmth and color. In some castles, stoves were introduced to heat individual rooms more effectively. These changes softened daily life, but comfort was still limited. No matter how many improvements were made, castles remained fortresses first and homes second. Their design never changed at its core. Thick stone walls, narrow arrow slits, steep staircases, and massive gates still defined castle architecture. These features were essential for defense, but they also restricted light, space, and freedom of movement. Castles were built to resist attack, not to adapt easily to peaceful living. For a long time, direct assaults on castles rarely succeeded. Attackers relied on sieges, cutting off food and supplies while waiting for defenders to surrender. These sieges could last weeks or even months, testing endurance on both sides. Hunger, disease, and exhaustion were often more deadly than weapons. Then came gunpowder. Cannons changed everything. Walls that had once seemed indestructible began to crumble under repeated bombardment. Stone shattered, towers collapsed. The defensive advantages that castles relied on for centuries suddenly became weaknesses. High walls made easy targets, and narrow spaces trapped defenders rather than protecting them. Castles could no longer guarantee safety. Building and maintaining them became expensive and impractical. Gradually, they lost their military role. Some were abandoned and left to decay. Others were repurposed as prisons, storage sites, or administrative centers. A few were transformed into noble residences, modified to suit a more peaceful era. Yet even as their function faded, their presence remained powerful. Ruins stood as reminders of a harsher time. Towers and walls still dominated landscapes, silent witnesses to centuries of conflict, fear, and endurance. For the people who once lived inside them, castles were never symbols of fantasy. They were demanding, uncomfortable, and often unforgiving places. Life within their walls required discipline, resilience, and constant awareness of danger. A medieval castle was not built for dreams or romance. It was built to survive. And for those who called it home, survival was more important than anything else. As castles lost their military importance, something deeper faded as well. The harsh rhythm of life that had defined them for centuries. What once demanded constant vigilance slowly became unnecessary. The world was changing, and stone fortresses could no longer keep up. Power began to shift away from isolated strongholds towards centralized states and standing armies. Warfare moved from sieges and walls to open battlefields and firearms. Nobles no longer needed to live behind massive defenses, and many chose comfort over isolation. Palaces and manor houses replaced castles as symbols of authority. Life outside the walls also changed. Towns grew, trade expanded, and people relied less on local lords for protection. Roads improved, borders stabilized, and daily life became more predictable. The fear that once justified castle living gradually faded. Inside abandoned castles, silence finally settled. Halls that were once filled with voices, footsteps, and clashing metal stood empty. Fires no longer burned. Stone grew cold and still. Roofs collapsed, wood rotted, and nature slowly reclaimed what had once been a place of power. Some castles survived by adapting. They were rebuilt, reshaped, and softened. Defensive walls were lowered, windows widened, and interiors redesigned for comfort. These structures no longer served as shields against enemies, but as reminders of heritage and status. Today, castles stand as monuments to endurance. Tourists walk through corridors where people once struggled to stay warm. They admire architecture that was never meant to impress, only to protect. What we now see as romantic ruins were once demanding homes that tested everyone who lived within them. It is easy to imagine medieval castles as places of glory and adventure, but the reality was far more difficult. Life there required resilience, discipline, and constant adaptation to cold, noise, and danger. Survival shaped every decision. For those who lived behind their walls, castles were not symbols of fantasy. They were shelters built from fear, necessity, and strength. And while their purpose has long faded, their stone remains, reminding us of a time when simply enduring was the greatest achievement of all.